My daughter announced it at Easter dinner, right between the ham and the scalloped potatoes, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "We've decided to move in with you, Mom," she said, dabbing the corner of her mouth with my grandmother's linen napkin. "The commute will be so much easier for Derek. And honestly, the kids need more space than our apartment can give them." I set down my fork. I looked at her. I looked at my son-in-law, Derek, who was already cutting a second slice of ham without having looked up from his plate. I looked at my neighbor Ruth, who had joined us that afternoon because her own family was in Phoenix and she hadn't wanted to eat alone. Ruth met my eyes. She gave me a very small, very careful smile. "That's interesting timing," I said. My daughter Cassie looked at me the way she has looked at me since she was about 14, patient, slightly condescending, as though she was waiting for me to catch up to a point she had made 3 sentences ago. "It's not that complicated, Mom. We just need more room, and you have it. It makes sense for everyone." I picked my fork back up. I took a bite of the potatoes I had spent 2 hours making from scratch. "It does seem like it would make sense," I agreed. She smiled. Derek finally looked up. Ruth took a long, quiet sip of her iced tea. What none of them knew, what I had not yet said out loud to a single person at that table, was that 3 weeks earlier, on a Thursday afternoon, while Cassie was at a spin class and Derek was at his office and the grandchildren were at school, I had signed a purchase agreement on a 2-bedroom condominium in Sarasota, Florida. I had put down a deposit. I had already spoken to a real estate attorney, and I had scheduled a meeting with the listing agent for my house in Millbrook for the following Tuesday. I had not planned to say any of this at Easter dinner, but I also had not planned to be told, over my grandmother's good dishes, that my home had already been decided upon. So I suppose we were both full of surprises. I should tell you how I got here, because it didn't start at Easter. It started the way most things like this start, slowly, quietly, with small things that felt almost reasonable on their own. It started about 8 months before that dinner, when Cassie called me on a Sunday afternoon in August and mentioned, almost as an aside, that their apartment lease was coming up. Derek's company had moved offices. The new location was 40 minutes from where they lived, and the traffic was brutal. They were thinking about their options. I said all the right things. I said that sounded stressful. I said I hoped they found something that worked. I did not, in that conversation, offer my house. And that matters, because I want you to understand that I knew even then. I knew that the offer was going to be extracted from me if I didn't protect myself. I had been a mother for 34 years. I knew exactly how the conversation would eventually be shaped. Sure enough, 2 weeks later, Cassie called again. This time, she mentioned that houses in the school district near Derek's new office were expensive, really expensive. They didn't want to stretch themselves too thin. And my house, she said, as though she were simply observing a fact about the weather, my house was in that district already, without them having to do anything at all. "I'm not sure what you're telling me," I said, though I was entirely sure. "I'm just saying," Cassie said, "that it would be logical. That's all. I'm not asking anything." She wasn't asking. She was surveying. I told her I would think about it, which was not the same as saying yes, though I understood she would hear it as a preliminary yes. That was a choice I made deliberately. I needed time, and I bought it with ambiguity. I am not proud of that, but I am not ashamed of it either. I was 63 years old, and I was trying to figure out how to save my own life. My husband Gerald died 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, 7 months from diagnosis to the end. It was fast and it was terrible, and it left me in a house that had been built for 2 people, with a garden Gerald had loved, on a street where I had lived for 22 years and where people knew my name when I walked to get the mail. I want to be clear about something. I was not lonely. I know people assume that. They see a woman my age living alone and they imagine her staring at walls, eating soup from a can, desperate for company. That was not me. I had Ruth next door, who I had been friends with for 15 years. I had my book club on the second Thursday of every month. I had a part-time position at the library, 2 mornings a week, which I had taken not because I needed the money, but because I liked the work and the people and the smell of that building in the morning when it was still quiet. I had a life, It was quieter than the life Gerald and I had built together, and I missed him every single day, but it was mine. And I had built it carefully, and it was good. What I did not have, I will admit, was a plan for what came next. I had assumed, vaguely, that I would stay in Millbrook, that I would tend the garden and go to book club and work my library shifts, and eventually, when the house became too much to manage, I would figure something out. I had not thought about Florida. I had not thought about starting over. Cassie gave me that. Not intentionally, but she did. The first time I understood what was actually happening was in September, about a month after that second phone call. Cassie and Derek brought the kids for a long weekend. Our grandson Max is 9, and our granddaughter Lily is 6, and I was happy to have them. I made up the guest room and Lily's old portable bed, and I stocked the refrigerator with the things the children liked, and we had a genuinely lovely Saturday. We went to the farmer's market. We had lunch on the back porch. Gerald had built that porch himself, the summer before Max was born, and I have never been able to sit on it without thinking of him. It was Sunday afternoon, while the kids were watching something in the living room, that I noticed Cassie and Derek had disappeared. I found them upstairs. They were standing in the doorway of the second bedroom, the room I used as a study, where I kept Gerald's books and my sewing machine and the desk where I paid bills and wrote letters, and sat in the early morning with my coffee when the house was still. They were measuring it. Derek had a tape measure extended across the width of the room, and Cassie was writing something in her phone. Neither of them heard me on the landing. "The closet's a good size," Derek said. "We'd have to move her stuff out," Cassie said. "But that shouldn't be too complicated." I stood there for a moment. Then I went back downstairs. I sat in the kitchen, and I held my coffee mug with both hands, and I thought very carefully about what I had just seen and what it meant. They had not asked. They had not said, "Mom, would you mind if we took a look at the layout?" They had simply gone upstairs while I was making tea, and they had begun measuring my home. I did not say anything that afternoon. Or that evening. I said goodbye when they left on Monday morning, and I hugged the grandchildren and I waved from the porch until their car turned the corner. Then I went inside and I sat at the desk they had been measuring around, and I started to make some calls. The first call was to my friend Patricia, who had sold her house in Connecticut 2 years ago and moved to a retirement community in Naples. I had quietly judged Patricia for this when she did it. I want to be honest about that. I had thought she was giving up. I had thought she was surrendering something important. Patricia picked up on the second ring, and I told her what had happened with the measuring tape. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How long have you been waiting for this call to yourself?" I didn't answer right away. "I knew the week after Gerald died," she said. Not that it would be Cassie specifically, but I knew that once the house became available, in any sense of the word emotionally, logistically, whatever someone would start doing the math, it's what people do. "She's my daughter," I said. "I know," Patricia said. "That makes it harder, not easier." I asked her about Naples. I asked her about the community she had moved to. She talked for almost an hour, and at the end of it, I asked her to send me whatever information she had. The next call I made was to a financial advisor I had used several times since Gerald died, a no-nonsense woman named Barbara who had always given me straight answers. I told Barbara I was thinking about selling the house. I told her what I thought it might be worth in the current market. She asked me a series of questions, and then she told me that if I moved to Florida, between the sale price, Gerald's pension, and what we had in investments, I would be more than comfortable. More than comfortable was a phrase that landed somewhere in the middle of my chest and stayed there. I spent 3 weeks doing research I hadn't known I needed to do. I looked at communities in Sarasota and St. Petersburg and Bradenton. I requested brochures that arrived in plain envelopes so I could sort through them without explaining anything to anyone. I took one trip on my own. I told Cassie I was visiting a college friend in Tampa, which was almost true, since Patricia drove up from Naples to meet me, and I spent 2 days driving around and looking and sitting with the particular feeling of a place to see if it felt right. One of the communities I toured was on a quiet street 3 blocks from the water. It had a clubhouse and a pool, and a garden that residents could tend if they wanted to. The 2-bedroom units had good light and high ceilings, and a small screened porch off the living room. The woman who showed me around was not pushy. She showed me everything and answered my questions, and then she gave me her card and said to take all the time I needed. I sat on the screened porch of the model unit for a long time after she left the room. I thought about Gerald's porch in Millbrook. I thought about how I had spent 4 years tending something that had been built for 2 people. I thought about Cassie's voice saying her stuff shouldn't be too complicated to move. I thought about being 63 years old with a good mind and reasonable health and enough money, finally, to make a choice that was simply and entirely my own. I put down a deposit before I flew home. October and November were interesting months. Cassie called regularly. The conversations had a particular shape. She would begin with normal things, how the kids were doing, how work was going, and then she would circle around to the house. Not directly. Cassie has never been direct with me when she wanted something, which I recognize as a trait she learned from watching me be indirect with my own mother, and I carry some guilt about that. But the subject was always there, orbiting the conversation. The apartment lease expired in February. Derek's commute was wearing on him. The kids' school situation was uncertain. I listened. I said things like, "That sounds tough, and I hope you find a solution that works." I had become very good at saying nothing while appearing to say something. In November, Cassie and Derek came for Thanksgiving, and this time Derek brought it up directly. We were doing the dishes together after dinner, just the 2 of us, while Cassie put the kids to bed, and he said, "Margaret, I want to be up front with you. We're really hoping you'll consider letting us move in. Just for a year, maybe 2, while we save up for a down payment. You'd still have your space. We'd work around you." I liked Derek when Cassie first brought him home. He was straightforward in a way that people often aren't. He had held a job since he was 16. He was good to my grandchildren, but standing in my kitchen telling me he would work around me in my own home, in the place where Gerald and I had eaten 30 Thanksgiving dinners, he sounded like a man who had already decided the answer and was only going through the courtesy of asking. "I appreciate you saying that," I told him. "So you'll think about it?" "I'm always thinking," I said. He took that as a yes. I could see it in the way his shoulders relaxed. I handed him a dish towel, and we finished the rest of the dishes in silence. The listing agent's name was Tom, and he came to the house on a Tuesday morning in early December when the trees in the backyard were bare and the garden looked exactly like what it was, something that had been tended with love and was still beautiful, but was going to require decisions about its future. Tom walked through every room with the practiced, pleasant manner of someone who has seen the insides of thousands of people's lives and has learned to be neither moved nor clinical about it. He told me what he thought the house would sell for. He told me the market in Millbrook was strong. He told me the spring was usually the best time to list. I told him I wanted to list in January. He raised an eyebrow. Not rude, just surprised. "Any particular reason for the urgency?" "I've already found what I'm going to next," I said. "I don't see the point in waiting." He nodded slowly. He seemed to understand that I was not a woman who was making a hasty decision. He was right about that. I had been making this decision, in one way or another, for 4 months. We signed the paperwork that afternoon. I did not tell Cassie. I know how that sounds. I turned it over in my mind many times. She was my daughter. This was the house she had grown up in, had come home to from college, had brought Derek to for the first time on a rainy November weekend when she was 27. Her bedroom still had the small mark on the doorframe, where she and her best friend Heather had measured their heights every summer until they were both teenagers. My grandchildren had learned to walk in the hallway of this house. But I also thought about this. At no point in any of these months of planning and circling and measuring my study had Cassie asked me what I wanted. She had told Derek the apartment lease situation. She had told me that it made sense for everyone. She had used the phrase, "Her stuff shouldn't be too complicated to move about my things in my own home," and she had said it to her husband while standing in my doorway without having asked permission to be there. She had not asked me how I was doing since Gerald died. Not really asked. Not in the way that expected a true answer. She had asked in the way that assumed she already knew, and the answer she assumed was that I was fine and the house was too big and I surely must want the company. So no, I didn't tell her. I told Ruth. I told Patricia. I told my book club, because I was going to have to stop coming, and I loved those women, and they deserved to hear it from me directly. Barbara, the financial advisor, knew, obviously. My attorney knew, and I told them all, gently but clearly, that I was asking them to keep it to themselves for a little while, just until I was ready. The house went under contract in February, 12 days after it was listed. The buyers were a couple in their late 30s with a young child and another on the way. They loved the garden. They loved Gerald's porch. The wife cried a little when she walked through the backyard, and I thought, this is the right family for this house. Gerald would have liked them. Closing was scheduled for late March. I had not yet told Cassie. She had called in January and in February, and both times we'd had our usual circular conversations. And both times she'd asked, in one form or another, whether I'd given any more thought to the living arrangement. I'd said I was still thinking. She had started, gently, to express impatience, mentioning that their lease ended in April, that they really needed to make a plan, that she hoped I understood what was at stake for the grandchildren's schooling. I told her. I understood. I told her we should all have dinner at Easter, that we could talk properly then, as a family. She said that sounded great. She said she was looking forward to it. I invited Ruth to come, not to witness anything, genuinely, because Ruth was my friend, and I didn't want to eat Easter alone, and because I suspected the dinner might be complicated, and I find Ruth's company steadying. Which brings us back to the ham and the scalloped potatoes and my grandmother's linen napkins, and the moment my daughter announced, with Derek nodding beside her and the children already excused to go play in the yard, that they had decided to move in. After I said that's interesting timing, and Cassie gave me her patient, slightly condescending look, I put down my fork again. You said you'd been thinking about it, she said. It's been months, Mom. We need an answer. We've been very patient. You have been, I agreed. Both of you. Very patient. Derek looked up. Ruth set down her iced tea. So? Cassie said. I folded my hands in my lap. I looked at my daughter, my 34-year-old daughter, who I had rocked to sleep and read to and driven to school and every dance recital and every volleyball game and every college tour, who I had helped move 4 different times and whose wedding had been one of the best days of my life, and who, over the past 8 months, had slowly and without malice made me feel like a problem to be managed, rather than a person with her own ongoing life. The house went under contract in February, I said. We close at the end of this month. The room did what rooms do in these moments. It went very still. Cassie stared at me. Derek stopped chewing. Ruth looked very carefully at the centerpiece. What? Cassie said. I've already bought a place in Sarasota. A condo, 2 bedrooms, right near the water. I put down the deposit in October. October. She said the word like it was in a foreign language. You've known since October. I've been planning since September, I said. When I found Derek measuring the study, Derek's face did something complicated. To his credit, he didn't deny it. Mom. Cassie's voice had changed. The patience was gone. What replaced it wasn't anger, exactly. It was something younger. Something that reminded me of her at 16 when she'd discovered the world was not going to arrange itself around her needs. You should have talked to me. You're right, I said. And you should have asked before you started measuring my home. She opened her mouth, closed it. I'm not angry, I said, and I meant it. I had spent enough time being angry in October and November and December, when I was making calls and meeting with attorneys and researching condominiums, and somewhere between December and now, the anger had burned itself down to something quieter and more settled. Not peace, exactly, but something in that neighborhood. I genuinely am not angry, but I want you to hear me when I tell you that this has been my home and my decision and my next chapter to figure out. It was not a logistical resource to be allocated. We were just trying to be practical. I know, I said. I know you were. But practical for who? Because I remember having a different conversation in my head, one where you called me and said, Mom, we're in a tough spot. We need help. Is there any chance? And you asked, as a question. Not an arrangement. Cassie looked at Derek. Derek looked at the table. What about the grandkids' school? She said. You knew how much that mattered to us. I did. which is why I spent 3 weeks researching districts in the area and put together a list of neighborhoods within your price range that are also zoned for Lincoln Elementary. I reached into the pocket of my cardigan and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I had prepared this in advance. I had known this argument was coming. I had Barbara run some numbers. If you talk to a mortgage broker in the next 2 weeks, you could potentially be under contract on something before your lease expires. It's tight, but it's doable. Cassie took the paper without looking at it. I also want to say, I continued, that I love you, and I love Derek, and I love my grandchildren more than anything else in my life. That is not the issue. The issue is that I am 63 years old, and I have been widowed for 4 years, and I have kept this house and this life going on my own, and at no point in any of these months of conversations did either of you ask me whether I was happy here, whether I wanted to stay, whether I had my own ideas about what came next. Cassie was quiet. Did you? She said finally. Her voice had changed again, younger still. Do you? Have your own ideas? I do, I said. I have a screened porch in Sarasota that gets the afternoon sun. I have a garden plot I've already signed up for. Patricia is 40 minutes away. There's a library 3 blocks from the complex that's looking for volunteers. I'm going to learn to kayak. I paused. I've been wanted to learn to kayak since 1987. Something moved across Cassie's face. Something I hadn't expected. Not anger, not the patience mask. Something honest and a little lost. And it hurt me to see it, the way certain true things do. I didn't know that, she said quietly. I know, I said. That's part of why I'm going. We had a long conversation after dinner. Not easy, but honest in a way that our conversations hadn't been in a long time. Maybe in years, Cassie cried. I didn't, but only because I had already done that part. Alone, in October, sitting at Gerald's desk with the real estate brochures spread around me, crying not out of grief, but out of something more complicated. The particular pain of realizing that a relationship you thought you understood has quietly shifted into a shape you don't recognize. Derek said very little, which was appropriate. At one point, he said, I owe you an apology for the measuring tape, and I told him I appreciated that, and that I hoped they found something wonderful, and I meant both things. Cassie asked whether she could visit me in Sarasota. I said I would love that. I told her I had 2 bedrooms and one of them was entirely for the grandchildren, already planned out, and that she could bring them any school break she wanted. You planned a room for the kids? She said. I'm their grandmother, I said. Of course I did. Ruth, bless her, had quietly started doing the dishes in the kitchen around the time the crying started, and she emerged periodically to refill glasses and then retreated again, which is one of the many reasons I have cherished her friendship for 15 years. By the time Cassie and Derek got the children loaded into the car, Lily asleep on Derek's shoulder, Max dragging his feet in the way of tired 9-year-olds everywhere the sun had gone down and the porch light was on, and the yard looked the way it always looked in April, that particular new green that Gerald loved. Cassie hugged me in the driveway for a long time. I'm sorry, she said into my shoulder. I didn't ask. I know, I said. And I should have talked to you sooner. I was scared. Of what? That you'd talk me out of it, I said. Or that I'd let you. She pulled back and looked at me. I think she understood, in that moment. Something about me that she hadn't quite seen before. That her mother was not only a mother, that I had been someone before she was born, and that I was still that person, underneath everything, with my own wants and my own ideas about kayaking and afternoon light, and what came next. I wouldn't have, she said. I don't think maybe not, I said. But I needed to know that myself first. I closed on the Millbrook house on a Thursday. I handed over the keys to the young couple with the garden-loving wife, who was visibly pregnant now and who pressed my hand and said they would take good care of it. I believed her. I drove to Sarasota on a Saturday in April, Ruth following in her own car, because she had decided, impulsively and delightfully, to drive down for the first week and help me get settled. We stopped for lunch in Georgia at a place that had good pie, and we sat on the restaurant's porch in the warm afternoon, and Ruth said, Gerald would think this was wonderful, you know. I hope so, I said. He would, she said. He always said you worried too much about everyone else. I thought about the desk, about the measuring tape, about the moment I had stood on the landing and understood what was happening and known, somewhere I couldn't quite name yet, that it was also the moment I was going to change my life. He was usually right about things like that, I said. The porch of my condo in Sarasota faces west, and in the late afternoon the light comes in low and gold the way it only does near water. I have a coffee table now that I picked out myself, without consulting anyone, because it made me happy, and 2 chairs on the screened porch that were made for sitting in for long hours looking at nothing in particular. I planted things in the community garden in May. There's a woman 2 doors down named Evelyn, who has been there 3 years, and who knows everything about what grows well in this soil and what doesn't, and we have fallen into the habit of early morning coffee in the garden on the days we're both out there. Cassie and the grandchildren came for Memorial Day weekend. Lily slept in the room I had set up for her with the yellow quilt, and Max slept on the fold-out and didn't complain. On Saturday, we walked to the water, and Max found a horseshoe crab shell, and Lily asked me at least 11 questions about why the ocean is salty, none of which I could fully answer. On Sunday evening, Cassie and I sat on the screened porch after the children were asleep, and she told me things she hadn't told me in years about how hard the last year had been, about Derek's job stress, about the particular loneliness of a marriage that is solid but strained. I listened without trying to fix anything, which is something I have never been very good at but am trying to learn. Before she left, she stood in the doorway of my bedroom, just for a moment, and looked at the room, the light, the simple furniture, the photograph of Gerald and me from our trip to Maine in 2012 that I keep on the dresser. "It looks like you," she said. "It is me," I said. "That's the point." She nodded. She came and hugged me. She smelled like sunscreen and the particular soap she's used since college. And for a moment she was both the daughter I had made and the woman she had become, standing in a room that was mine and mine alone. "I'm glad you did it," she said. "So am I told her. "I start kayak lessons in June. The instructor's name is Rob, with 2 B's. He is very specific about this, and he tells me that most of his students my age are naturals on calm water, that the trick is simply not to fight the current. I told him I had some practice with that. He laughed, and I laughed too. There on the dock with the water sparkling and Sarasota laid out bright and wide around me, and I thought, 63 years old, and I am just beginning to learn what belongs to me.